3 words. That's it. That is the entire hook for today.
Yeah.
We're looking at a command that's just 3 words long, but Charles Spurgeon, the guy they call the Prince of Preachers, he argued these 3 words carry more weight than almost any other short sentence in history. Remember Lot's wife.
It is a striking command, so crisp, so urgent, and it's actually one of the shortest verses in the New Testament. Jesus said it in the book of Luke, but he's throwing it all the way back to a story from Genesis right at the beginning of the Bible. And today, we're not just, doing a casual reading. We are doing a deep dive into a very specific historic analysis of this figure.
Right. We're looking at a sermon that was delivered way back on August 24th, 1879 by C.H. Spurgeon. And I have to be honest, when I first saw the date on our source material, I expected, a really dry, dusty theology lesson.
Some old-fashioned fire and brimstone.
Exactly. But what we actually have here is this fascinating, almost clinical psychological profile of a woman who doesn't even have a name in the record.
It really is a psychological profile. I think that's the best way to describe it. Spurgeon takes this ancient story and he just unpacks the psychology of being almost saved. It's a study on how close a person can get to safety, physically, socially, even intellectually, and still miss it completely, the ultimate near-miss story.
And he paints such a vivid scene to get us started. He doesn't begin with the wife, though. He sets the stage by contrasting 2 very different lifestyles, her husband's uncle, Abraham, and her husband, Lot. And this isn't just about geography, is it?
No, not at all. For Spurgeon, this is really the foundational conflict. He describes Abraham's life as the separated life. Now, we need to be careful with that term because today that might sound like, he's running a cult in a bunker or something.
Right. Living off the grid, storing canned beans.
Exactly. But for Spurgeon, Abraham's separated life meant independence. Abraham lives in tents. He wanders. He doesn't settle down and integrate with the nations around him. Spurgeon calls this a life of calm, unstaggering assurance. Abraham is independent of the world because he's totally dependent on God. He doesn't need a city's economy or its walls for his protection. He's self-contained in his faith.
Which sounds very noble. But then you have Lot and Spurgeon. Well, he really goes after Lot. He doesn't paint him as a villain exactly, but he's definitely not the hero of the story.
He really isn't. Spurgeon characterizes Lot as righteous, so technically he believes the right things, but fundamentally Lot is a weak follower. Spurgeon uses this brilliant phrase that just stuck with me. He says Lot had a lean-to religion.
A lean-to religion. I highlighted that too. It's such a great image.
Isn't it?
For anyone who hasn't built a shed lately, a lean-to is a structure that it only stands up because it's propped against a real building. It's got a couple of its own legs, but it needs that main wall to keep from collapsing.
Precisely. And Spurgeon argues that Lot only stood upright because he was leaning on Abraham's much stronger character. He was a follower, not a leader. And as long as he was with Abraham, he looked like a strong believer. But the second he separated from Abraham, that structural weakness was exposed. And it all starts with what looks like a very pragmatic business decision. Lot chooses the well-watered pastures near Sodom.
It's a real estate play.
Mm-hmm.
He's just looking at the market and seeing an opportunity. But Spurgeon is so quick to point out the slippery slope here. It wasn't like Lot just moved into a condo in downtown Sodom on day 1.
No, and that's the danger Spurgeon highlights. It's gradual. First, Lot chooses the direction of the city for, financial gain. Then the text says he pitched his tent towards Sodom. That's a crucial distinction.
Oh, right.
He's still in a tent. He's still technically living that separated life. But his front door is facing the city. He's looking at it every day. He's starting to enter into friendly relations.
And eventually, the tent has too many inconveniences, as Spurgeon puts it. It's drafty, it's temporary. So he gives up the tent and moves inside the city walls. He becomes a citizen.
And the consequence of that, according to Spurgeon, is that Lot's witness is effectively silenced. He notes that God actually stopped speaking to Abraham about Lot as an heir the moment Lot left that separated life. Lot might have been uncomfortable with the sin in Sodom's stirred. Spurgeon says he was vexed by it, but because he was in it, his protest meant nothing.
That's a powerful point. You can't critique the culture effectively if you're indistinguishable from it.
Exactly. Which brings us to the central figure of our deep dive, the woman who was right there beside him, Lot's wife.
The worst half, as Spurgeon calls her.
A very harsh title, but given the outcome, perhaps accurate.
So let's unpack her profile. The first thing that blew my mind in the source material is that Spurgeon points out she has no name. I had to double check that, but he's right. She is just Lot's wife.
It is a significant detail. Spurgeon contrasts her with the other matriarchs, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel. They all have what he calls an honorable memorial. Their names are recorded. But Lot's wife, she's anonymous. And Spurgeon has a fascinating hypothesis about why that is.
Yeah, he speculates on her background. He suggests she wasn't from the same stock as Abraham, right?
Correct. He theorizes she might have been a native of Sodom, or maybe a Canaanite or an Egyptian woman that Lot married on his travels. Spurgeon suggests she's omitted from the holy household records because, spiritually speaking, she was never really part of the separated people. She was an insider to the city, but an outsider to the faith.
And this leads to Spurgeon's speculation about why they moved into the city in the first place. This part felt very, I don't know, almost like a Victorian novel. He imagines the conversations that must have happened between Lot and his wife.
It does feel like a novel. Spurgeon speculates that while Lot was weak, his wife was the real driving social force. He imagined she found the tent life unfashionable, rigid, and peculiar.
I wrote down some of the phrases he used. He imagines her complaining about the vulgar shepherds and saying that for the sake of their daughters, they needed to find eligible matches.
Exactly. It's the desire for society. Spurgeon suggests she wanted the refinement, the liberal ideas, the parties of the city. She didn't want to be an outsider living in some dusty tent anymore. She wanted to be in the mix. She wanted her daughters to marry well into the best families of Sodom.
And she got her wish.
Yeah.
She gets her husband into the city. She gets her daughters married into the local elite.
But the result, as Spurgeon points out, was ruin. She gained the society she wanted, but it cost her everything. And this brings us to perhaps the most chilling part of Spurgeon's analysis, this concept of being almost saved.
This is where it gets really interesting and, frankly, a bit terrifying. Because on paper, she looks like she should be fine.
If you look at her resume, spiritually speaking, it's impressive. She's the wife of a righteous man. She lived in the tents of Abraham. She knew the truth. She participated in the worship. She wasn't an atheist. She wasn't some idol worshiper in the traditional sense.
And it goes even further than that. Spurgeon points out that when the destruction was coming, she literally hosted angels in her living room. She saw them perform miracles, blinding that angry mob outside their door.
And she was physically acted upon by grace. Spurgeon really emphasizes this. The angels didn't just give her a map. They seized her by the hand. They physically pulled her out of the city.
So she's holding hands with an angel running away from a doomed city. You really can't get much closer to salvation than that.
And that is Spurgeon's primary warning. He says, ties of blood are no guarantees of grace. You can be married to the saintliest person on earth, you can sit in the pews every week, you can be surrounded by miracles, and still be internally disconnected from the truth. Proximity is not the same as possession. Just because you're standing next to the fire doesn't mean you're warm.
So she's out of the city, she's running, but then comes the failure. And Spurgeon breaks this down into steps. It wasn't just like a sudden reflex, was it?
No, he calls it the anatomy of her sin. It wasn't just one moment, it was a progression. The first step, he notes, was lingering.
She slackened her pace.
Right. Spurgeon notes that while Lot was running, she fell behind. She was dragging her feet, her body was moving away from Sodom, but her will was resisting the move the whole time.
And then comes the environment. Spurgeon highlights a detail from the text that I had completely missed before. The sun was rising.
It's a crucial detail. The text says the sun had risen upon the earth, so it was a beautiful, bright morning. And Spurgeon argues this led to the second step of her sin, unbelief.
Because it didn't look like doomsday.
Exactly. I mean, think about the cognitive dissonance. The angel says, run for your life, fire is coming. But her eyes are telling her, it's a beautiful Tuesday morning. The birds were probably singing, the market was probably opening up. Spurgeon suggests she looked at that lovely morning and just didn't believe that fire was actually going to fall. The visual evidence contradicted the word of God.
Which leads to the final act, the look. But Spurgeon insists this wasn't just a casual glance over the shoulder, to see if the house was still standing.
No, he calls it a love glance. That is a heavy phrase. He argues she looked back because she wanted to be there. Her household stuff, her furniture, her social status, the ease of the city, those were still her masters. She looked back because her heart was still in Sodom.
And it was a direct rebellion, right? The command wasn't vague. It was specifically, look not behind thee.
It was the one specific prohibition given for the escape. And Spurgeon notes that rebellion is just as clear in breaking a small command as it is in breaking a big one. It was a defiance of God's word in favor of her own desire.
So she looks. And then the doom. salted with fire.
It's a horrific image. Spurgeon points out the incredible tragedy of the timing. She didn't die in the middle of Sodom. She died, according to his reading of the text, at the very gates of Zoar, the city of refuge where they were heading.
She was at the finish line.
On the brink of salvation, but became a victim of eternal wrath, and Spurgeon emphasizes the suddenness of it. There was no time to repent, no time to turn her head back around. She died, as he puts it, in the very act of sin.
She became a pillar of salt. Spurgeon calls it a statue of salt, a permanent monument.
And he believes that monument is there for a reason. He says she stands as a warning to anyone who tries to, and I'm quoting here, sneak in among the ungodly to enjoy their pleasures while still professing faith. He's warning that you can't have it both ways. You can't live in Sodom and run to Zoar at the same time.
It's a heavy warning. But Spurgeon doesn't just leave the blame entirely on her shoulders. And this brings us back to Lot. This part of the sermon really struck me. The copybook analogy.
Oh, this is a brilliant pedagogical tool Spurgeon uses. He compares influence to a schoolboy's copybook, where you practice handwriting.
Right, where you have the perfect example on the top line and you try to copy it.
Exactly. So line 1 is the perfect example. That's God or the perfect father. If you copy that line directly, you get an Abraham character, noble, strong.
Okay.
But line 2, that's where you copy the human example. If you copy Abraham, you get a Lot. Lot is a second-rate Christian, as Spurgeon calls him. He's decent, but he's weak. He's a blurry copy of the original.
And then comes line 3.
Line 3 is when you copy the weak copy. If you copy Lot, you get a total failure. You get Lot's wife.
Wow. So the degradation of character just gets worse with each step away from the original source.
Precisely. And this is where Spurgeon lays culpability on Lot. He says Lot failed to manage his household. He allowed his wife to lead them into that worldly compromise. If Lot had been firm, if he had said, no, we are a separated people, we stay in the tents, she might have still been worldly in her heart, but she wouldn't have been in the position to be destroyed with the city.
That is a tough pill to swallow for any leader or parent. It's basically saying your compromise doesn't just affect you, it sets a lower ceiling for everyone who's following you.
It's the burden of influence. Spurgeon argues that because Lot lingered, his wife lingered. Because Lot was attracted to the edge of the city, his wife went all the way in.
So what does this all mean for us? We've looked at the weak husband, the worldly wife, the tragedy of being almost saved. What are the key takeaways from this deep dive?
I think there are 3 main things Spurgeon wants us to grasp. First is the extreme danger of looking back. And it's not just about your eyes, it's about your heart. If your heart is glued to the world, you will perish with the world, even if you are physically sitting in a church.
Right.
Second is the insufficiency of proximity. We cannot rely on our parents, our spouses, or our social circles for our standing with God. Almost saved is, in the end, not saved.
And the third.
The tragedy of the finish line. To come so far, to leave the city, to cross the plain, and then to die at the gates of refuge because you just couldn't let go of the past.
Spurgeon ends the sermon with a pretty intense charge, doesn't he?
He does. He calls for a separated life. And he clarifies that this doesn't mean we all have to go live in literal tents out in the desert. He's talking about the going of the heart. He wants the listener to be decisive, to not have that lean-to religion that just drifts wherever the culture goes.
It's fascinating how a sermon from 1879 can feel so painfully relevant. We might not be tempted by the society of ancient Sodom, but the pull to fit in, to upgrade, to be fashionable and compromise our values, that hasn't changed a bit.
Human nature doesn't change. The specific distractions change, but the love glance back at the world, that's universal.
And that leads me to a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. Spurgeon made a huge deal about that love glance, that split-second decision to look back at what she was leaving. If a single glance was enough to turn a woman to salt in Spurgeon's theology, what does that imply about us today? We live in an economy of attention where we are constantly glancing at our phones, at the lives of others, at a million distractions. Where are we directing our love glances? Are we looking forward to where we're going? Or are we, like Lot's wife, desperately trying to keep an eye on a world we're supposed to be leaving behind?
That is the question.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.